Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Team Tuesday. This week, we have with us Paula Dunne. Hey, Paula, welcome back.
Yeah.
So on Tuesdays, we definitely want to dive into teams, their own universe, and of course, how sometimes they become their own worst enemies. But before we dive into that, Paula, do share with us, what's the book that most influenced you in your career as a Scrum Master?
Yeah, the book that most influenced me, not just as a Scrum Master, I actually read it before I was a Scrum Master, is The Art of Being Brilliant by Andy Cope and Andy Whittaker. So I read this book quite early in my career, and it really focuses on positive psychology. And the reason I think that's really valuable as a Scrum Master is because it's to persuade people, communicate clearly, and project an element of confidence. So this book is really interesting in that it goes into how an individual can build that themselves. So how you can use some scientific psychology tips and some less scientific but equally effective tips to be more confident yourself. And then with that, how to build that in others. So I found it really helpful, particularly in the context of working with teams and individuals, to emphasize focusing on the positive rather than the negative. And I think you'll find that in retrospectives that it's really easy to get bogged down in what didn't go well and focus on critical analysis. But from a team and an individual, how do you shine the light on what is going well and build that up rather than switching into a critical doubting phase more often than not?
Absolutely. I really like that perspective when talking to teams of trying to focus on the things that they are already doing well and then building on that, right? So one of the things that I like to say is that you get what you focus on, right? If you focus on the negative, you will find always more negative things to focus on. If you focus on the positive, then you will find always more positive things to focus on. And in systems, especially in teams and organizations, if we amplify what is working, my friend Woody Zuill likes to call it turn up the good, right? If we always turn up the good, then we are creating a positive dynamic that not only energizes people, that's, I guess, obvious, but also prevents them from getting caught up, and especially for engineers, this is a very common anti-pattern, caught up in these negative spirals of finding yet another problem, yet another problem, yet another problem.
Yeah. And I learned that through coaching sport as well, actually. One thing that they teach you really early on as a sports coach is if you tell someone not to do something, the only thing their brain can think about is doing that thing. So really, really important to flip that to, rather than saying, don't do this, what is it that you want them to focus on and, as you say, dial up rather than speak in negatives or double negatives.
Yeah, absolutely. Watch out, don't fall from the stairs, don't fall from the stairs, and boom, then we fall from the stairs. That happens with children a lot.
Yeah.
Rather than, hey, come here. That would be a better choice. And of course, we apply all of this when we work with teams. And it's important to be able to focus on what are the good things the teams are doing and how to amplify that. But it's also important for Scrum Masters to identify potential anti-patterns quite early on before they become a problem. And that's why here on Tuesdays, we like to explore some of those anti-patterns and how they grow up, even from small things like, offhand comments or small behaviors that can be amplified in certain conditions. So share one of those stories with us, Paula.
Yeah, I think linked to the description of the book, one thing that I've noticed with teams that can be, I think, self-destructive was the phrase that we talked about earlier, is silence and teams not necessarily sharing the good or the bad. And particularly when it comes down to individuals and individual performance. So that can be as simple as, I need something from my teammates and I asked them last week and they've still not provided it. I've seen, particularly in the virtual world, it's very easy to decide not to have that conversation or not to chase, not to follow up. And equally, not necessarily to give people the praise or the thank you that will be second nature if you're in the office. So that's one thing I think as a Scrum Master is quite key, because you will see things that don't necessarily impact everyone in the team. People might speak to you about an issue with one particular person or a couple of people, and what you really want to do is try and encourage the feedback between the two. And sometimes it's as simple as, have you asked them? So we've had that a couple of times with stakeholders where the team aren't quite getting the feedback that they needed or the right steer that they needed. And it's been more about trying to open up that conversation and say, either have we asked them for exactly what we need, or have we understood what their challenges are? So trying to, again, with that lens on positive psychology, always give people the benefit of the doubt and think, okay, if they're not giving us what we're after, what is it that might be stopping them? And is there something we can do that will help them?
I think this, especially these aspects that you're sharing, positive psychology has so much to give us, right? And you said, start from the perspective that they just don't know yet, right? Like ask, can I get whatever it is, like help with this or the feedback we're looking for? And I very often see this, and my own, I've done for my own personal use, and of course to grow as a coach, I've done my own therapy. And one of the things we talk about is what happens when we look at what people do with a positive expectation, right? Like, for example, you invite a friend to go out for dinner and they don't show up. Like they didn't reply to your message, or they didn't reply to your email. And it's very, very easy for us to get into that spiral of, oh, they just don't like me anymore. They don't want to work with me, or they don't want to do what I've asked, or they don't want to go for dinner with me, right? But one of the things that has been found in relationship studies is that actually relationships where there's a positive expectation, right? Like, for example, if my friend doesn't go out for dinner with me this month, I just expect that they just couldn't. So I'll ask next month again, right? When people go into relationships with a positive expectation, the relationships tend to be more fulfilling and longer lasting, right? And I think that you're also pointing to that here in what comes to the context between team members and teams and stakeholders, correct?
Yeah. And I think, as you say, sometimes if you get a reaction that you weren't expecting or is more negative than you're expecting, often your first assumption is, oh, that was about me. What did I do? And again, that's something that I've worked with teams where we've had a couple of snappy stakeholders and we've thought, oh, what on earth went wrong there? What could we do? And we've taken the decision to just watch it and observe and see if it happens again. And then more often than not, you find out later in the day that something happened in their own personal life, or something else is going on in the wider ecosystem, and it's not a reflection on you yourself or your work. And that isn't something that comes naturally. That is something that I think you need to be very intentional about pausing and taking a step back, discussing it with another team member. Ideally, if you've got that relationship, discussing it with that person as well, to say, oh, when you said this is how I took it. Is that correct? Or a really simple, is everything okay? Which again, I think virtually has to be really intentionally done. It's really easy to jump on a call and get straight into the meat of what you're discussing. but really, really crucial to just sense check that everyone is okay and understand what meeting they last came out of in order to get into the right head frame for this meeting.
Absolutely. I think you raised a topic that is super critical. The remote work environment is a lot less conducive for us to treat each other as humans. Not because it's necessarily wrong from the perspective of, how individuals relate to each other, but also because many of us have a full schedule of meetings, and we typically have meetings back to back. Thank you, Outlook. And because we don't have any break, right? Like in the real world, you would actually get up, walk to the next meeting room, physically walk, right? Which increases our cognitive ability just by doing that. But in the virtual world, we end up sitting the whole day and just clicking buttons to go from one meeting to the other. And we're not necessarily present and even emotionally available for the new group we're meeting, right? And it's very easy to snap or even to lose attention to what is going on in that second meeting.
Yeah. And I think linked to the feedback points I was making earlier about teams and understanding where people are coming from. I think you are often receiving feedback, whether you know it or not. So yeah, even some of those cues like body language or tone of voice, you can pick up some of that from an individual, positive or negative, and a little bit of that can be lost virtually as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It also, not everybody even has their cameras on, right? Which makes it a lot harder. Yeah, and from this, at least I take this important takeaway, which is that as Scrum Masters, we need to be looking at the relationships within the team and between team and stakeholders intentionally, right? That was the word that you used, and I think it's beautifully applicable here, right? We need to look at relationships as an integral part of doing the work, and if the relationship isn't working, we have to think, okay, how can I make that relationship work? How can I help it, get to a positive state? Thank you for sharing this. This was a very deep set of thoughts and tips. I'm really grateful for you sharing that with us.
Welcome. Thank you.
Tuesday is Team Day here on the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. But tomorrow we talk about something that goes beyond the work we do with the teams. We will talk about how to lead change and what our guests have learned from leading and participating in change programs during their career. See you tomorrow. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.